Sometimes that's not the best thing. Grayson, your thoughts on the realignment circus that continues to roll on, and George Kliavkov's comments today at Pac-12 Media Days?
Yeah, I think that kind of based on just everything that I've seen, it seems, I think the Pac-12 is pretty much just in survival mode, right? They're trying to make themselves look as appealing as possible. And, I don't think that's a bad thing, right? They kind of have to do that. I think it's kind of funny that, a lot of the shots that George is kind of pulling are at the Big 12. And it's like, oh, but then when he talks about the Big 10, everything is kind of calmed down and a little bit more, rational. And I find that to be hilarious as well because, the Big 10 did just take two of their biggest schools. But, for the Big 12, I think it's just what it is. Big 12 has got to be aggressive. The Pac-12 is in a position where they're very vulnerable right now. And I think that they're probably intimidated, fearful, scared for the next chapter. And I think on the Big 12 side, Big 12 is just sitting in a good position right now, sitting back and just kind of waiting for the chips to fall. And I'm very curious how things play out. But, do you expect anything different? Out of the Pac-12 commissioner right now, they're in a really tough spot. And I don't think anything he could really say would really help change the national and public perception.
It's weird. One of the things that the Pac-12 has going for it and against it is that they have schools that most everybody would want. That have options like Oregon and Washington. Like they would have options if they were offered those options. Just like everybody else, you have, schools that, wouldn't. The Big 12 is sitting with a lot of brands right now that aren't valuable. They know they're valuable. We know they're valuable, but they're not Oregon and Washington valuable because of brand and market size. So the Big 12 can just kind of sit and wait because they're not the conference that's going to get poached. So while it's kind of, ho-hum that they've got some brands that people aren't as crazy about, it's kind of a good thing that nobody's sitting there trying to poach them while some of these Pac-12 fish are in the water.
Yeah, I think the other problem with that, Paul, is another big problem with the Pac-12 is that Oregon and Washington know that, and they continue to basically tell the Pac-12 that, if that makes sense. Whereas on the Big 12 side, it's like everybody's together. Everybody's like, you know what? None of us can really act like we're bigger or tougher than everyone else because we don't really have a ton of options right now. Whereas in the Pac-12, you got schools that just think they are the best school in the country and should easily get an offer to the Big 10. And the problem is that just simply is not realistic. Teams are going to get left out. And if they're not realistic about it, that's just going to continue to separate the conference and separate the people who are really the schools that are really on board with trying to make the conference work versus schools that are really on board with just getting everything they deserve, in quotes, as a program.
Yeah, the Big 12, you're lucky to have us schools are in the SEC now. Like that, They're gone. And so because Big 12 dealt with that for a long time. You're lucky that we're here. We could go anywhere else if we wanted to, and that was obviously true. But that whole idea and the unequal revenue sharing is just something that is not necessarily sustainable because eventually you're like, well, this just isn't fair. And
right.
especially when, those teams with unequal revenue share bottom out, and they're not, winning or doing anything for you. So,
right. Like if Washington is going 5-7 every year, are they really, contributing to the bottom line of the conference? Not really, not to the level that they should be getting an unequal revenue share. And even Oregon, we'll see how they do over the next few years, but they just lost another head coach. And they're kind of in a spot right now where it could go either way, right? They could, get back to being the level of program that they've been over the past, decade, really. Or they could, kind of teeter back to being an 8-4, 9-win team, which is good, but it's not what you need to be if you really want to sit there and say we need unequal revenue sharing. Like of the schools like in the Big 12, for instance, the only one that could really say, we deserve that is really Oklahoma. Just based on what they've done on the field, the national brand that they've been able to kind of build. Texas, on the other hand, have had a decade of just really not putting a great product on the field, which, that's tough. That's tough to defend.
Well, and look, you say Oregon in the last decade. In the last decade, they've had 5 head coaches: Chip Kelly, Mark Herzlich, Willie Taggart, Mario Cristobal, and now Dan Lanning. So,
yeah,
that's an average of every 2 years they've been changing a coach. So while their brand might be strong, every 2 years you're changing a coach. That's not great. So
it's not yet. Somehow they've found success with all of them have had at least a season or two of success, which is pretty crazy with some of the names that you've mentioned on that list that one very, very closely.
Hey, I told you I was very concerned about that one when they didn't even try to make him stay. Like, oh, we're going to Florida State. Oh, hell, really? Oh, man, we're going to miss you here. What time's your flight? We'll take you.
I remember that, too. I remember you had some skepticism there, and I think that proved to be right.
Look, I'll just compare it. Mario Cristobal leaves, and there's panic across Eugene, Oregon, right? Like, what's going to happen? Who are going to hire? Like, all these other big hires are happening. How can you get in on this? Like, Oregon's big, but they're not that big. Phil Knight cares, but not that much. All these different things. Like, can't just go swing. Like, what's the best decision to make? That was the panic. Willie left. It was like, oh, dang. He's friendly. Like that was it.
Yeah, he just showed up in a great position in Oregon and just, and then he goes to Florida State. And I know you've said this a million times, but golly, what he did to the offensive line at Florida State, just unforgivable.
Yeah, no, it was already like smoldering. And he threw gasoline on that. So it was all bad. But anyway, all right.